Next up, remember this? That's from July 4th, 2019, in what feels like a lifetime ago, back when large groups of musicians could actually perform in front of packed crowds. And while Governor Baker is letting some performances resume in limited capacities, there's still a lot less work for local musicians, many of whom are freelancers and have been living on the financial edge. And that's where the New England Musicians Relief Fund is looking to help. I'm joined now by one of the founders of that group, Hazel Dean Davis, who's also an orchestral, hornist, and regular performer with the Boston Symphony Orchestra and the Pops, including in that clip we just showed you. And we're also joined by another guy you might recognize even after all these months, Pops conductor Keith Lockhart. Keith, good to see you. Hazel, good to meet you.
Thanks, Jim. Likewise. Good to be here.
You know, you said something last time we spoke, Keith, that was obvious, but I hadn't thought about, which was your industry, if I can call it that, was practically the first to be shut down and unfortunately is probably going to be the last to reopen. How hard has that reality been to deal with?
Well, you can certainly call it that, Jim, because one thing I think people forget, even people who really enjoy coming to performances, is that these performances are made by people who make their livelihoods by making those performances. In the industry, we've started to refer to March 13th, the day that things initially shut down with a bang, as the day the music died. I hope that's an overly pessimistic statement. But basically, from that point on, there have been no large public performances. I mean, music is a congregational activity. It requires us to be able to gather in large groups.
You know, Hazel, a couple of days before March 13th, I think it was March 11th, I know you were rehearsing for a performance. I read this in a local paper this afternoon. And you got the word. You have a smile on your face now. I bet you didn't then. What did it feel like when you were told it's over? No rehearsal, no performance, nothing.
It was I was completely stunned. I'm still stunned. It was in the middle of the rehearsal, actually. It was on break, and we were rehearsing Four-Ray Requiem with cantata singers. And it was during our break when they got together and sent us home, and I haven't played in public since.
That's unbelievable. So the New England Musicians Relief Fund, you're one of the founders of this thing, which is why I wanted you both to come here tonight. What's the purpose? What's the goal? Who are we out to help?
So as it sunk in that the cancellations were going to go on more than a couple weeks, the Boston Musicians Association, the local union office, was bombarded with calls from musicians asking for help. And they went to work. I mean, they worked tirelessly to try to help musicians figure out the unemployment system, which is very complicated for musicians. We make money through both W-2 employers and 1099 employers. And so we fit in this, like, in between the two unemployments, and many people didn't qualify at all. So it quickly became clear that the crisis was more than the musicians union office could help with. So a group of freelancers and local music execs and some of those union board members got together, and we decided that we needed to create a relief fund from scratch. And that's what we've done.
You know, you touch on something I think it's really important for people to understand, because I misunderstood. There was celebration that, as pathetic as Congress is, when they passed the CARES Act several months ago, they expanded unemployment coverage to so-called gig workers, freelance workers. But as you just described, since so many musicians have their feet in both camps, as employees part-time and as freelancers, they fall through a donut hole that makes them ineligible for either the gig unemployment or the traditional unemployment. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. So if you are lucky enough to make enough money in one or the other, then you could qualify for one or the other. But it basically, they will only look at your income from one or the other. So they will not look at it together, which means that musicians were qualifying for almost no benefits.
You know, Keith, when you talk to your players, you know, people like Hazel, how, I assume across the board, even if people are getting side jobs, this has to be crushing, you know?
Well, this hurts on so many levels, Jim. It's not just an economic crisis. Most of us, this is all we've ever done, I think, since the age of 5, 6, 10. Psychologically, it's huge, too. And a statistic that shows you exactly how dire this is, the musicians local in Boston has membership about 1,700. They report an estimated 125 of their members are doing any work whatsoever at this point, and 3/4 of those are members of the Boston Symphony, who are fortunate enough, of course, to be full-time employed by a large employer that they have continued, albeit with a substantial wage reduction.
Wait a second. Wait. Do you mean musical employment for the 125 or any employment for the 125?
Only employment within music, I would suspect.
Oh, within music. Okay. So, Hazel, how are people getting by if they are? We're 6.5 months into this thing. And again, I don't mean to keep casting a dark cloud. You all are likely the last people to go back to work. How are they surviving?
Barely. I think a lot of my colleagues and I have done okay over the summer because of the CARES Act and any benefits we could get from that. But I fear it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. The fall is usually when our calendar opens up and all the seasons start, and the holidays usually bring in a lot of our income. And obviously all of that is dark.
So if you raise as much money as you hope to raise, what happens? Where does it go? What do people get?
So right now we are offering grants. At this point, it's $1,000 checks to any musician who worked more than 50% of their income came from music, who is now without work.
I'm going to give the email address in a second. You know, Keith, before you go, as Hazel was talking, I was thinking about the scores of conversations I've had with you and Andres Nelsons about the importance of music, particularly in difficult times, and the irony that it's not here when arguably we need it most, and that the people who give it to us are suffering as well. It's just this endless cycle of horror, you know?
It is. The most ironic thing possible is that this fall, I mean, for so many reasons, those of us who are too young for World War II, none of us have ever lived through this difficult a time. This is the kind of time when people need the arts. They need the emotional release of the arts more than at any other time. And it's the only time in anybody's memory that we haven't been able to be there for them. And that hurts in both directions.
And if I can add.
Absolutely.
So musicians, if they cannot survive, if they can't weather this pandemic, we're going to lose some to the profession. And Boston, everyone knows Boston as a vibrant arts community, and it will be devastating if we lose these musicians.
And not just the musicians.
I know.
The institutions also.
Of course.
The longer they can't reopen, the harder it is to find a way back.
Yeah.
Well, I know I speak for everybody. I hope we see you on a stage as soon as possible. In the interim, I hope people help with the fund to keep people afloat. Hazel, it's great to meet you. And Keith, great to see you as always. Thanks so much.
Likewise, Jim. Thank you.
Thank you.
For more information on the New England Musicians Relief Fund, visit them online at nemrf.org.